Hey guys, welcome back to the Speaker's Edge podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you develop and grow as a speaker and a communicator by learning from some of the world's very best speakers. Speakers like John Maxwell, Les Brown, Nick Vujicic, Seth Godin, Bonnie St. John, Bob Goff, Robert Cialdini, Chris Robinson. We've got many others to come. They're just the ones that we've had on the show so far. Many other great speakers still to come, so that you can really learn to master your message from these greats. Master your message and inspire your audience every single time you speak. Now, we have another great guest for you today, another great speaker, Miss America, Teresa Scanlan. We're going to dig into some of the lessons from the interview with her. But before we get to that, don't forget to download the companion guide for the show. Go to maxwellleadership.com/the Speaker's Edge, and you can download the show notes there. And we would love it if you like the podcast, if you like the show, we would love it if you rate and review the show as well. All right then, so I love this interview with Teresa Scanlan. She's a good friend of ours, and she was Miss America in 2011. She was just 17 when she became Miss America. But shortly after that, she had about 3 or 4 years after winning the Miss America crown in kind of going out and speaking, which we'll talk about and you'll hear her talk about in the interview. But shortly after that, she joined the Maxwell Leadership Certified Team about 10 years ago, somewhere around there. And then after she joined and came back as alumni to another one of the international Maxwell conferences, then we asked her to be the MC for the events. And for a few years, she was the MC. And she's just so good, so poised, so elegant, such a great speaker. But she didn't start out like that. She's a great speaker now, but it's great to hear her listen to her talking about her journey, because she really learned the hard way. She was kind of thrown into it. And it really was a skill, a development experience that was forged in the furnace of failure after failure. So after she joined the team, I had the opportunity to work with her one-on-one on her stories that she would include then as she got up to speak over the 3 days as an MC at the event. And she's got just a fascinating story, a really, really fascinating story. And for those of you with any kind of anxiety at all when you speak, you're going to be really empowered. Your confidence is going to be built as you listen to Teresa tell her story. Because she knew right from the beginning that she was not a natural speaker. In her mind, there was no doubt about it at all. She was not cut out for speaking, and she really didn't want to do it, and she wouldn't have done it at all. And on top of that, she's a bit of a perfectionist by her own admission. So if she did do anything, she had to do it perfectly, otherwise she didn't want to do it. So you combine her perfectionism with her terror of standing up and speaking in front of people, and it just makes for an extraordinary story. Because as I said, today she is a great speaker. She's a wonderful speaker, and she learned that through experience. And it's a process that she went through that any of us can model. So my wife, Susan, and I interviewed her. This is an extract that we're going to go through now on the show, just about 12 minutes from that interview that we did with her. And it all kind of centers around this growth process that she went through, the process of getting better and better and better. At the beginning of the interview, she kind of sets the scene by saying, what you don't realize when you win Miss America is the very next day you're on a 1-year speaking tour. And that's what she's talking about, this speaking tour. So straight away, like out on the road for the next 52 weeks. All of your events arranged for you, one to the next, to the next, to the next. And when I first started talking to her about this journey, I asked her about her first time speaking, the first one, like the day after winning Miss America at 17, unprepared, uncoached, really, to go out. And she said it was awful. My manager in the taxi on the way to the event said they want you to speak for 40 minutes. And she's like, what am I going to speak on for 40 minutes? And she said, just talk about your values, you'll be fine. And so she was thrown in front of the first audience. Afterwards, she said, Roddy, it was so bad, it was so cringy, but I didn't have any time really to think about it because we were on our way to the next event. And so I was thinking about that, and that's how it went, back to back for the first few months. Then she gradually started getting the hang of it. At the end of that year, she was a good speaker. Then she was booking herself even better, even more events, and she got better and better and better to the point where she's an incredible speaker, she really is. But it was truly forged in the furnace of failure. So we'll talk about that process at the end. If you can find a way to continually take imperfect action, that's what I take from a message. Whether you're pushed in front of the audience or there's some real reason why you want to do it, if you just move through the process, if you take imperfect action, then success is literally guaranteed for everyone, no exceptions. All right, here's Teresa, and then we'll chat afterwards.
Goodness, in the first year, I would say a possibly even conservative estimate, but at least very accurate, would be every other day. definitely speaking in some form. The majority, again, would be sort of keynote speeches, speeches of an hour, question and answer session type thing, but then plenty of media interviews as well. So usually those were in addition to maybe the same day or the previous day, radio, TV, that kind of thing. So it was a mix of all different types of settings. We did some work with Congress on Capitol Hill, lobbying for legislation, speaking before different boards. So sometimes it was small settings, sometimes it was larger. I think some of the largest crowds I spoke to that year were about 15,000 up to 20,000 in arenas,
Wow.
It was my intro into speaking with a translator and having to wait for someone to translate, seeing what translates and what doesn't even, you try a joke and it doesn't land and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So things like
Remember
that.
that nice time.
Yes. So it was quite a bit that year. We went to 4 countries and 40 states that year. So you're pretty much on a plane, every other day or every 2 days, you're in a new place. You go home, home for me was with my family in Nebraska for 1 week for Easter and 1 week for Christmas. But other than that, you're on the road solid. Where now I truly, and I mean this honestly, I do not have any memories of the year unless I wrote it down or unless I have pictures of it. Otherwise, I have no organic memories because it was just so blurry the whole time. You're partially sleep deprived the whole time, so you forget even more, and yeah, it's very busy. But the speaking, you feel it when something doesn't go well for sure. You can really have that pit in your stomach of, oh, that didn't go well. But what happened, eventually was, by midway or not even midway, maybe a couple months in, you sort of have your core speech or a couple of them, couple core elements that you kind of use then pretty consistently and then change and tailor as needed. It took a bit. And then, again, you get to the point where when you see something landed well, kind of there was a good response, you're like, okay, keep that. And so you continue to add on to that. So by the end, I did have, a good arsenal of different stories and different points and things like that to share that became a pretty good core, but it developed through a lot of trial and error versus any kind of intentional planning. It was sort of an after the fact thing, right? And seeing and kind of hearing from people even sort of what resonated with them when you would do autograph signings afterward, kind of talking to people, and there would be some consistency in, what they said was important or what really inspired them or what was helpful. And then I would think, okay, keep that, because that was obviously helpful to people, that sort of thing. So it very much though happened, in a post actually doing it way versus, planning beforehand or preparing or that sort of thing, because I didn't know what to do. There was no way for me to sit down and say, I know what I need to do to eventually have crafted this well. It was just learning on the back end. There were some standards for each audience. So I had sort of a standard school speech when I went and spoke to schools, high schools, colleges, that sort of thing. There would be a more standard speech when I, went and spoke at events for sponsors, or a more standard one that you did for nonprofit organizations. So I probably had about 3 or 4 that I had learned, that this type of audience or a similar audience, here's the one that I'll use. And then a couple others depending, and then would tailor it a little bit more. The Miss America crown has 4 points on it, and the 4 points stand for style, success, scholarship, and service. And so I ended up using those as the 4 points of my speech and tailoring some of my personal stories about my background in growing up, both funny and serious, and then just sort of messages that I wanted to share around those points. And because they are, things that were the most important to me, of course, being a part of the organization, sharing what the organization is all about. As you said, you are an ambassador, right, for the organization. Right. You're their cover girl, right? So you do share also about what the organization means and what they stand for. So I found talking about those things kind of systematically ending on service, talking about how the overall emphasis, of course, is about service to others, and tying in some of that sort of call to action for other people to also spend their life in service to others and to find ways that they can serve their communities and each other. And that's something, that you can obviously talk to kids in school about, that you can talk to nonprofits about, that you can talk to corporate executives about, right? It's a universal message. So it ended up being where that standard kind of arc, using the crown as a visual, could work for pretty much any audience. But then it was, just a matter of what within that I could do and talk about and use, and what was helpful to people. Then the following year was maybe even busier than the year itself, because then the schedule was up to me. And so I packed in even more. They were kind of nice to me. The organization would say, oh, you can do one event, then you can travel, then you can do another. When it was up to me, I said, sure, I'll do that speech, and then I'll fly here that night and do the next one, so I kind of really stressed myself out even more doing that. But I did, continue to speak that much for the next 2 years. In some ways, I was sort of overly confident in that ability at that point because, again, I did not have any formal way of getting feedback or training or that sort of thing. So sometimes looking back, I realize I could have been a lot better. And I'm not actually sure of how good I was, but I was awfully confident in it because, of course, when you've just spoken to a group of people, all you get is good feedback, right? So you get tons of people, praising you and So in some ways, I wonder sort of what objectively, what level I guess I was at in that speaking ability, right? Because I wasn't approaching it in any kind of formal way. So that was sort of difficult to know at that point. But I felt pretty confident about it by the end of the year. And again, because this was, personal stories and things that I cared deeply about, I got to the point where I wouldn't use notes. I would just know where I was going and the general arc of my story and then go from there. So it became pretty natural and easy to be able to go anywhere. They would give me, the basic rundown of who the audience is, maybe sort of what tone they'd like something to take, and then I could take it from there and run with it.
Quickly.
Yes, more condensed. I would always pretty much do all four, but I would then condense or expand as necessary, take out certain stories or certain pieces. And so, again, even that it got to the point where I did it enough that it was sort of natural. I could look at the time and feel out how much I could add in or take out and kind of go from there. And then also feeling the audience, and sort of seeing where they are feeling energy or not and go from there as well. So some of that became pretty intuitive to me at that point. But again, in this very organic way that I didn't know what it was, but some of it was coming naturally as I learned. The first time, Roddy, I heard your approach as well with the having different, energy levels and payoffs throughout, right? That was something that, similarly, I had sort of felt and learned to do by feeling that from the audience. Oh, now we need, to slow down, take some time here, but then you need to pick up the energy again, tell us a funny story. So I would have, a certain number of funny stories, a certain number of more serious things. And then even in competing in pageants, what you learn to do is you're supposed to practice being able to answer questions in 30 seconds because that's the time that you have in onstage question. And then even in interview, it's good practice to basically answer in 30 seconds because you only have 10 minutes, right? So you learn to tell personal stories in about 30 seconds. So that helped as well, kind of leading into speaking was just sort of try to get those short stories that you can tell pretty succinctly in 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes, but definitely not sort of long, drawn out pieces. Susan, God must have known that about me for sure, because he knew I would never start speaking if I wasn't thrown into it because truly I'm like that. I feel that I have to prepare and spend, 10, 20 years preparing and then never actually do it. Honestly. I mean, that's even how I had been approaching competing in pageants is I thought that I was going to prepare for another 7 years, before I would be ready to win or compete. So I I certainly get that. I have felt that way. I still struggle so much with it because you do feel that you have to be to a certain level, that things need to be perfect, that you can't make mistakes as you go. And so it's true that looking back, I realize it's the opposite of, how I've experienced the most growth in my life and the most success in my life has definitely been kind of just trying it anyway, and doing it when you feel afraid. And so a couple pieces there. I mean, I think we say these things and they sound sort of cliche almost until you realize just how true it is. But doing things afraid, for sure, sort of when you feel that fear, you almost know that's when you need to try it, is because you need to lean into that fear and sort of experience what it feels like to do it with that feeling, right? And so having to do that at that point was good for me. And now sometimes I can kind of draw back on that experience and realize, hey, I've done this before with that pit in my stomach, right? So I know I can go ahead and do it. So there's definitely that piece. And then another piece recently, I think that it's important to always know that you're allowed to be a work in progress and also be, sharing with people and sharing your gifts and doing what you can and even teaching other people. I think so many times if you're speaking in a capacity that has to do with sort of teaching or you're being held out as some type of leader or expert, you feel like you have to be at a certain level, but we're all allowed to be a work in progress and also do that at the same time, right? And so I think that's the most important thing for myself and for everyone to embrace, is just knowing that, I'm at a certain point on this journey, who knows where. Your audience is at a certain point on that journey, who knows where, and we all are. And so it's never going to be this kind of, I've arrived, I've made it, and now I can do this.
So you see, she's just a wonderful person, isn't she? Really, really nice person, but just such great experience that she's learned from going out and speaking. And so if you just move through the process, you will get better, no exceptions. Now, you've heard me talk about the Maxwell Leadership Certified Team. If you're a regular to the show, then you've heard me talk about it before. If you're interested in developing your speaking, check it out. Just go to maxwellleadership.com/speak and find out from a program advisor what it means to be a Maxwell Leadership Certified Team member. There's no one better to model than John Maxwell, frankly. There's no better system than the Maxwell method of speaking, and there's nowhere better to learn that than in the Maxwell Leadership Certified Team. There's about 60,000 coaches worldwide now in about 168 different countries. There's no obligation, so you lose nothing just by going to maxwellleadership.com/speak and booking a session with a program advisor and finding out about it. All right then, so I just want to pick up on the process that Teresa went through unknowingly. It's very well documented, actually. Anders Ericsson wrote a book called Peak a number of years ago, talking about deliberate practice. In fact, he talks about 3 different kinds of practice. He talks about naive practice, purposeful practice, and deliberate practice. Deliberate practice being the gold standard. He said, naive practice, which if any of us, most people don't do any practice with speaking, any preparation. But if they do any practice, often it's naive practice. So here he talks about like a piano player, let's say. You enjoy playing the piano. Your friends come over at the weekends and you always play the same piece for them when everyone's drunk. That, and you've been doing that for 20 years and everyone enjoys it and sings along. He says that's not growth. In fact, if you play the same piece for 20 years without any specific intention of trying to get better, then you actually get worse. There's research that shows that you get worse, not better, just by doing naive practice. So that's not what we're doing. Obviously, it's better than doing nothing, but that's not what we can aim higher. We can do better. And then he said the next step is purposeful practice. So this is where you have a specific objective of what you want to achieve. So you're practicing with an intention of getting better. So you've got specific objective each time. You've got very focused practice sessions on reaching that objective. You want immediate feedback, and then you want to try and keep yourself constantly on the edge of your comfort zone. So you're always stretching, always reaching. If you think of it like, you're trying to balance, so you're always trying to find your balance and then finding yourself just off balance. So you're struggling to find your balance again. They're the 4 steps of purposeful practice. So a specific objective, not just randomly playing, specific objective where you want to improve. Focus practice sessions geared around trying to make that progress. Immediate feedback. So with speaking, video yourself. It's so easy to video yourself and then watch it back. So immediate feedback. And then number 4, constantly pushing yourself so that you're on the edge of your comfort zone. Always growing, always growing. So that's purposeful practice. And then he said the gold standard is deliberate practice, where step 5, you get expert coaching, someone that can help you through that process and keep you on the edge of your comfort zone all the time, growing and growing and growing and growing. And this is what we do so well, of course, in the Maxwell Leadership Certified Team, which is why I'm so proud of it and why I'm always encouraging you to check it out if you want to develop your speaking, because it's a great next step. I think you can sum up really what Teresa was talking about by saying take imperfect action. Find a way to take imperfect action, and then you'll keep growing. And if you're growing, it's just a matter of time. All right, that's it for this week. Don't forget to download the companion resources. As I said, go to maxwellleadership.com/The Speaker's Edge. Remember, communication is a learnable skill. And if you develop that skill, learn that skill, then you can learn to master your message and inspire your audience every single time you speak. And it will literally transform your life. Look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks for listening. Take care. Lots of love. Bye-bye. God bless.